Drawing this cute dragon is easier than you think, and I'm about to show you exactly how you can do it. And there may or may not be a giveaway later in the video, so stay tuned for that. So we're going to start by creating a new canvas. And here, I'm just personally going to go with the size of the iPad screen because this is a demo. But if you want to customize and pick your own size, you would click on this button right here. So we're going to start by doing a very rough sketch to map out and plan our dragon. Now for that, obviously you can use any color because we are not going to see the sketch in the final result. I'm personally going to use just a neutral gray like this one. Now the brushes you use in this video don't matter at all. You could just use a basic round brush, whatever you have in your software, especially for the sketch because again, we're not seeing it in the final result. It does not matter at all. That being said, I'm going to do my best to give you options as I go through the different parts of the video. So a brush that would work well for the sketch would be in the sketching pack, the 6B pencil. That being said, I'm personally going to be using the brushes from my Ultimate Illustration bundle, which are right here. And I'm going to work with the sketching brush to do the sketch, and later the outlines brush and maybe the basic texture as well, we'll see. Now those brushes are not essential at all, but if you do want to check them out, they will be linked in the video description below with a special promo code for the YouTube people. And we're going to start with just a super simple, very rough circle like this. And this circle is later going to become the bottom section of the back. Then from there, you're going to create another one of those circles, so roughly the same size, higher up at a 45-degree angle. And this is going to become the shoulder area. Now once we have the body, we're going to sketch the head. I'm going to go with a rounded rectangle, but you could go with any type of shape you want. And of course, we can always refine it later down the road. I'm going to give you tips on doing that later in the video. Great, so now we have the circles for the body and the shape of the head. We are going to come back to the body and actually connect the circles to have first the back, and then the belly. Then from there, we're going to draw the legs. And for that, it might be helpful to draw a super simple horizontal line like this, just to help us visualize the length of the legs a little bit better. Then all we have to do for now is draw some big ovals. So one pretty wide for the back leg, and then two slightly taller ones for the front legs. And you can see I'm pretty much aligning them in the middle of my circles. And the front leg that is in the back, if that makes sense, is going to be a little bit shorter than the one in front because it is further away from us. And I almost forgot, we're also going to add the second back leg, of course, which is also slightly shorter. Now this was by far the hardest part of the entire video, so if you made it this far, you can for sure complete this illustration. If at any point you realize you need more room in your sketch, super easy, you can use the arrow tool right here, making sure it is set to uniform. You will be able to, well, move your sketch and put it somewhere else and even resize it if you need it. For example, I feel like I didn't have enough room for the tail, so I'm just going to move my sketch a little tiny bit toward the right. So speaking of the tail, that's what we're going to draw next. And it's an easy element to customize to make the dragon your own. So you could have the tail be this big C shape like this, kind of flicking upward. You could have it just extend back, so kind of a big tail falling down. Or you could, like me, have it fall down and then flick back towards the viewer a little tiny bit. So kind of like it's folded. So if that's what you want to do, I'm going to personally start by following the shape of the belly like this, or the curvature of the belly. And then instead of following the shape of the back like this, which would create a really thick tail, that's totally okay if that's what you want, that's just not what I want. I'm going to start roughly in the middle of my circle, so pretty much in line with the hip right here. And I'm going to create a big long, whoops, a big long S curve down that way. And then I'm going to draw a smaller S curve to complete the front part of the tail. Great, so at this stage we have the whole body, but the head is pretty sad, so we're going to focus on that for now. And the first thing we're going to do is draw what I call the plus sign. So we're going to start by drawing one simple, slightly curved vertical line. And then almost in the middle, but a little bit lower, we're going to draw a slightly curved horizontal line. Now, once we have that, it's going to be much easier to draw the facial features. So I'm going to start with big eyes, and I'm going to go with these kind of slightly pointy ovals. But you could easily change the shape to draw a different type of eyes. And at this stage, whatever you draw does not need to be perfect at all. We just want to have a rough idea of where everything is going to be. Then we're going to place the nose and the mouth. I'm going to keep the nose super simple. I'm just going to draw 2 little dots in the line with the bottom of the eyes. And my classic mouth style is having a super tiny mouth off to one side. So that's what I'm going to draw. But again, you can totally change that to suit your style a little bit better. And again, don't worry if your sketch is super messy right now, it's totally okay, that's normal. I'm going to give you tips on making it look better and tweaking it before we start adding the colors. But before that, we are going to customize our dragon a little bit by adding some more elements on the head and on the back. So the first thing I personally want to do is refine the top of the head. So instead of having this big rectangle, I'm going to have the top half, at least above my horizontal line, come inward a little bit more. So the corners are going to be slightly, or quite a bit actually, not slightly, quite a bit rounder than the bottom corners. From here, I'm going to add a couple horns on my dragon's head. So these just very super simple C shapes, kind of on the very far edges, the far corner, whatever. And I'm also going to add some big ears that are pointing down. Then from there, I'm going to go and add, oh gosh, I don't know what I would call them, just like very, very big scales, I guess. I'm going to add 3 on top of the head and then 3 on each side of the face. I'm also going to add 1 wing, pretending the other one is hidden by the body, because I feel like wings are a really nice way to make it look more like a dragon and less like just, a dinosaur. So yeah, I'm gonna add 1 super simple one. And I'm going to have it start in the middle of the back, so between our 2 circles. And then I'm going to draw this, just slightly curved line that goes almost at a 45-degree angle. And I think I'm gonna go with more of a like bat wings type. So I'm going to add 2 more branches. I don't know what those are called, but yeah, branches. And then I'm going to make everything a little bit thicker. And finally, connecting each branch. So very, very rough sketch. Again, this is not meant to be pretty. It's just meant to figure out what we want to do and kind of have a brainstorm essentially before moving on to adding the colors. I'm also going to add some super simple big plates on the back. I know those feel dinosaur-ish, but I just think they're really cute. Now look very closely. Right now I'm following the shape of the back, so kind of following the spine. But because I have a flicked tail, the spine, well, it expands in the tail at that point, is going to come in and flick as well. So for a little while, we're going to see those plates come up kind of in the middle of the tail. So you can draw a S-curve like this to use as a guide, and then just keep drawing your plates along that guide. So they're really changing direction right here in the bend. And I'm going to have the last 2 plates be a little bit smaller. Yeah, just like that. Now the last thing I'm personally going to do is refine the bottom of the legs. And it's going to be super simple, especially in the front. I'm just going to add this little nub like this, remembering that the front leg and the back is a little bit shorter. And then the actual back legs, I'm going to have nubs as well, but slightly longer nubs. So that's really it for the basic structure. Now we're going to start adding the colors in the next chapter, but before that, make sure you take the time to try any other element you might want to add to your dragon. And also make sure you're super happy with the proportion and the positioning of all the elements. So for example, I feel like my head might be a little bit too wide and I guess just too wide. So if there's any element that, like me, you're not super happy with, now's the time to change it while you're at the sketching phase. And an easy way to do that is use your selection tool here at the top, setting it to freehand, and then just drawing a selection around whatever element you want to change. Make sure you close the selection by tapping on the little gray circle right here. And then if you go back to your arrow tool, you're going to be able to move the shape around by just moving it around with your finger. And you can also resize it by using the blue anchor points right here. Now, if you want to keep the same proportions, make sure your arrow tool is set to uniform. Otherwise, if you want to stretch or squish your shape, then go ahead and set your arrow tool to either freeform or distort. So feel free to pause the video here, take all the time you need to refine your basic shapes and to customize your dragon, and then once you're ready, we're going to meet up in the next chapter, which is going to be all about adding the colors. Great, so once you're happy with your sketch, we're going to move on to adding the colors, and for that we're going to use a trick that I really like to use, which is creating the outlines first, and then using that to easily add the colors. So go ahead and, well, we're going to start by renaming our first layer actually. We're going to name it Sketch, just so our file stays well organized, and then we're going to set the blending mode of that sketch layer to multiply. So you can tap on the little N right here next to the check mark, and this is a list of what is called blending modes. Now the one I want is at the very top, and it is called Multiply. Now Multiply is a really handy blending mode to use because it is going to make your sketch look always darker than the color underneath, unless that color underneath is black, of course. So that's just going to allow you to always see what you're doing really, really well. Now I don't want my sketch to be too distracting though, so I'm going to lower the opacity quite a bit. In your case, lower it until you can just barely see your sketch, but in my case, I'm going to see it a little bit more opaque so you can see it well in the video. Then once that is done, go ahead and create a new layer and drag it underneath your sketch and rename it to, let's just rename it to Dragon Outlines. Now obviously the color of your dragon is totally up to you. If you want to use the exact same red I am using, you can go here in the value section of the color selector. And in the hexadecimal section, you can go ahead and type A72D30. And the brush you use for the outlines is totally up to you again, and you have a few different options. I'm personally going to use the outlines brush from my illustration bundle because, well, that makes sense. But if you're working with free Procreate brushes and you want your brush to have a little bit of texture, you could go with the sketching pack that comes with the app, picking the 6B pencil. If you'd rather have just a nice clean line, then you could go in the inking pack that comes with the app and pick the Studio pen. But again though, in my case, I'm going to use my outlines brush. And before you start drawing the outlines, just go ahead and test the size. It's going to depend on the brush you're using, of course, as well as the canvas size you're working in. So just try it out. Just test a few things before starting, and once you feel like something works, well, that's the size you use. Nothing more complicated than that. And yeah, all you have to do here is trace your outlines for at least what is going to be red in the dragon. So in my case, it's going to be the whole body, the ears, the scale, the tail, the legs, and parts of the wings, but it's not going to be the plates on the back, the eyes, or the horns. And that's really it. Nothing special to it. You just go over your sketch, and if you have multiple lines like I do here, well, you just pick whichever line you prefer, or you make a new one and you go from there. So go ahead and pause the video here, draw your outlines, and then we'll keep going once your outlines look like this. Okay, so once you have your outlines, go ahead and hide your sketch just to make sure that everything is actually outlined. And also to make sure everything is fully closed. So you don't want any gaps between the shapes, you want to have one fully closed dragon outline. Then once you have that, go ahead and duplicate your dragon outline layer by swiping it toward the left with one finger, and then tapping duplicate right here. Okay, so look very closely here. This is the magic trick, and for a little while it's going to look absolutely crazy, but bear with me. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to hide the top dragon outline layer. Just tap on the little check mark right here. Then we're going to rename the bottom dragon outline layer to just dragon. Then we're going to fill the shape we have on the dragon layer with our color. So you can just drag and drop the color onto the shape. Now, if you use a brush that has some texture to it, you might need to adjust what is called the threshold right here at the top. And to do that, just hold your pencil when you drop the color and then move it on the screen from left to right until you find the moment right before the color fills in too much of the shape or of the screen. So in my case, it's going to be somewhere around here. Then once you have that, you can tap on the Oh no, it always leaves way too fast for me to say. Okay, I'm just gonna fill one other shape right here, and then we're going to tap on continue filling at the top. There we go. And then you can just tap on the different shapes to fill them in with your color. So that's great, but what's up with the dragon outline layer? If we reactivate it, we can't see anything because it is the same color as the dragon. So we're going to change that. So go back on your dragon outline layer, and then open up the adjustment panel right here and pick this first option, hue, saturation, and brightness. And then from there, we're going to make our outlines reappear by lowering the brightness slider, which is going to make them darker. Now, I like to have my outlines just be darker versions of whatever color I'm working with, but if you'd rather have just pure black, then you can go ahead and bring the brightness all the way down. Now, in my case, I'm going to set it around 40%, so just slightly darker than the base color. And then from here, you can probably see me coming. We're just going to repeat these 2 steps, or 3 steps, I guess. So drawing the outline, then filling the color, and then changing the outline color for the other elements we might have in the dragon. And I'm going to move on to the plates on the back next. But first, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video, myself. If you've been wanting to learn how to draw your own illustrations, to take whatever is in your head and put it on paper, then consider checking out my illustration course, Illustration from Scratch. This is a course with 10 modules that will teach you everything you need to know to start drawing your own art, no matter your current skill level. You will learn things like color theory, how to add lights, shadows, and create a mood. We will demystify perspective and how to create beautiful backgrounds. You will learn how to make your illustrations appealing with the use of good composition, on top of many other things like drawing realistic and cartoon characters, both the head and the body, as well as how to build good drawing habits and how to get unstuck on days where nothing seems to work. And although it is an online course, you won't be left alone. There are Q&A sections after each module where you can ask me questions, and there's also a private community for the students where you can post your exercises and course project to get feedback from me. So if you want to start loving what you draw, then check out the link in the video description below and make sure to use the special promo code to get the exclusive YouTube discount. I'll see you in the course! So same thing, creating a new layer above everything, renaming that new layer to, I guess, scales, whatever they are. And then picking the color we want to use for those. So not the outline color, really the shape color, because again, we're just going to make the color darker later for the outlines. So I'm going to have these plates be a nice yellowy orange, and the code for that color is going to be FBA33F. And then once that is done, I'm going to bring back my sketch and draw the outlines for the plates. And here's same steps we did for the rest of the dragon. I'm going to hide my sketch to make sure everything is outlined properly. Then I'm going to duplicate my outlines layer, hide the top copy, rename the bottom copy to just scales, and then fill in the shapes. From here, all we have to do again is just reactivate our outline layer, and then use our hue, saturation, and brightness tool to lower the brightness until we can see the outlines, which I think once more I'm going to go with the value at 40%. So I'm going to use the exact same technique here to draw the horns and the inside of the wings, but I'm going to stop talking so you can focus on drawing your own, and I'm going to keep my video going in the background so you can use it as a reference. So just draw any other element you might have except for the eyes. We're going to do those in a different way in just a minute. Just popping in for a second, if you are enjoying today's video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you are not already. I know this is the most YouTuber thing to say, and it still pains me to say it, but it really makes a huge difference when people do that. And it's a great way to support your favorite creators and help us create more free content for you. So huge thank you for your help, and let's get back to the video. Okay, so a couple special things for the wing and the horns. I don't know why I wrote wings with an S, I just have one, but we'll keep it like that. I actually want a little bit of transparency in the wing, so I'm going to tap on the N next to the check mark, and I'm going to lower the opacity right here, probably around, I don't know. Let's go with 80% for now. Now I'll do that on the outlines too, of course. And it's a little bit hard to see right now because the background is white, but yeah, it's really hard to see. But it's going to allow us to see behind the wing a little bit and just make the piece feel a little bit more interesting, I guess. Not that it has to be anything fancy, but it's always nice to add a little, or go the extra mile a little tiny bit. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some lines on the horns just to give them a little bit more texture. So going back on the horns outlines layer, and then grabbing the color I use for the outlines by just holding my finger onto it, and then simply add some curved lines like this all over both horns. Now one small detail here, in order to be able to fill in the horn with my color, I had to fully close the shape, which is one thing I mentioned, and that means I had to draw it in front of the head, which is not what I want. So I'm going to go back on both my horns outlines layer and my horns layer, and I'm going to erase any unwanted overlaps. So if you're in the same situation, go ahead and do that as well. So at this stage, we have pretty much the bulk of the color. I'm going to add a few extra elements, I guess, starting with some sort of a belly to break up the uniformity of the otherwise just plain color. So if you want to add a belly, it is super easy. You can go ahead and create a new layer above your dragon layer, rename that layer to belly, and then pick really whatever color you want. Of course, I'm going to pick a slightly paler version of my horn color. So I'm going to select my horn color and then really just bring it toward white right here. But you can see it was a really rough pick, so just pick whatever works for you. Now, of course, you could go ahead and just manually color in everything, making sure you stay within the lines, or you can make it a little bit easier on yourself by using a hack, or I guess you could call that a feature. It is called clipping masks. So if you go and tap on your belly layer, it's going to open up the layer menu right here. And then from that menu, you can select a clipping mask right there. And that's going to bring up this little arrow next to your belly layer preview. And then whatever you draw on your belly layer is going to stay within the shape of the dragon. Now you can stick with the same brush you've been using. I'm going to move on to the basic texture brush for this. It's a little bit bigger and there's a little bit more texture. If you are working with an inking, so super clean outline brush, you probably want to switch to something more like a basic round brush, which in Procreate you can find in the airbrushing pack. And the soft brush would probably work really well if you want to have, kind of a gradient on the edge of your belly. If you don't want to have a gradient, if you want to just have a straight hard line, then the hard brush would be what I would recommend. Then if you were working with the HB pencil in the sketching pack, then the 6B pencil is what I would recommend. Again, in my case though, I'm going to work with my basic texture brush from my illustration bundle. And I'm really just going to draw a super simple belly that is going to pretty much be in line with the legs, just a tiny little bit lower. And it's going to mostly follow the shape of the belly, so the curvature of the belly. Now you're going to probably see some overlaps of that color with the legs when you color in. That's totally okay. The clipping mask allows you to not spill out of the shape of the dragon, but it cannot know, that you have the legs there. So for now, just draw as quickly as you need to, and then we're going to come back and clean up those spills. So it's not a big deal. So I'm going to go with something a little bit like this, plenty of texture, plenty of grit, but of course I'm going to come back and, as I mentioned, I'm going to erase any overlap, any spills that I might have on the legs and on the arms. Now, I know I call this layer belly, but I'm actually going to add a few scales on that layer as well, just because I feel like the color is otherwise very, flat. Well, the dragon is very flat. And I'm just going to use a slightly paler version of my base color here. So nothing specific, nothing fancy. I'm just going to color pick it and kind of like what I did for the horns and the belly, make it manually a little bit lighter. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to draw some small dots. And for that, I'm going to go back to my outlines brush, but really whatever brush allows you to draw dots is totally fine here. And I'm going to draw a few groups of 3. So 3 here on the back, one bigger one, a medium one, and then a small one. I might add a few rings on the tail. I don't really know what I'm doing. I guess at this point it's kind of like doodling on the dragon. I might add a spiral and then the knee. Really, I'm just trying to make it look a little bit less flat and boring. Maybe 3 other little dots here on the shoulder. Yeah, super simple, but already it feels a little bit more interesting. I might also try to add a few spirals on the cheeks. For that, I need to bring back my sketch, of course, so I can know where the cheeks are. But that way it ties the spirals to the knees. Kind of brings back the same shape a little bit. Yeah, something like that. Great, so once that is done, we are finally going to move on to the eyes, which is perfect because we actually have our sketch reactivated, so we know what to do and where they are. So go ahead and create a new layer above everything we have so far. And bear with me here, we're going to use a little bit of a crazy method, and it's going to just feel very strange at first, but you're going to understand why we do it a little bit later down the road. So again, just bear with me for now. So go ahead and just create a new layer again at the top of your whole list right now and rename that new layer to, let's just say eyes. And on that layer, we're just going to draw the white part of the eyes. And I say white, but it's actually just going to be very, very pale yellow because I want to add a highlight later. And if we just use white to start with, then we're not going to be able to hide a highlight because there's, nothing paler than white. So yeah, a very, very, very pale yellow here. The X code is going to be F1DCD1. But then otherwise you just go ahead and trace your outlines and then fill them in. While you're working on this, let's talk about the giveaway. Now, it has been a little while since I've done a giveaway, but I figured it would be a good way to start the new year. So the prize this time is going to be my Ultimate Illustration Bundle, which includes the brushes I'm working with today. And there are going to be 3 winners. Now, the way to enter, it is super easy. All you have to do is leave a comment under this video with the color of your dragon and the first letter of your YouTube handle. So in my case, it would be Red G. Now, all the other details are going to be in the video description below, so make sure to check that out. But with that said, let's get back to our dragon. So once we do have that layer, I'm going to create another layer above it, which is going to be for, I guess it's the outlines, but it's not really the outlines because it's not going to be the full shape, but I'm still going to name it Eyes Outline. You can rename it that way as well. And we're going to use a slightly darker version of our dragon outlines color. So you can go ahead and color pick that. Once more, this is not a precise color in any way. And we're just going to make it a little bit darker. Now you could do the whole outline if you wanted to. I like to just outline the inner section of the eye. I'm not sure why. That's just something I do pretty much all the time. I guess that's part of my style now. So it's from the inner corner to the outer corner, but just the top of the eye. And I tend to have the very top be a little bit thicker than the edges or the end of the strokes, I guess. I feel like it just brings a little bit more emphasis to the eye and it frames it very nicely. But there's no really, fancy rhyme or reason why I do that. It's just something I noticed I do all the time, so I thought I'd share it with you. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the irises. And this is the bit that looks a little bit crazy, but again, bear with me. I'm going to show you why I'm doing it in a second. So we're going to create a layer between the outlines and the eyes, and we're going to rename that layer to irises. Oh boy, whatever that was. And like we did for the belly, we are going to apply that layer as a clipping mask on the eyes so the irises stay within the eye shape, which, again, so far that makes sense. Now you can have any color. Again, I'm repeating myself. You can do whatever you want. Of course, you're a free person. I'm not your mom telling you what to do. I'm personally just going to have the color I use for my outline, so a slightly darker version of my basic red. And here, I'm just going to draw a really, really big oval. So almost a full eye, but not quite. Now, why did we go with that weird technique of having 3 different layers instead of drawing everything on one? Well, of course, you can change the color more easily, like I talked about earlier. But what I noticed is a lot of people struggle with putting the irises in the eyes to make it look good and make the character look in a direction that makes sense. So it's super easy to do that more intuitively, or position the eyes more intuitively, I should say, is to use this method, because then you're able to just select the iris layer, and with your arrow tool, you can move them around. Because the eyes are so important in the piece, it's really nice to be able to get them just right. Now, this is only one part of the trick. The second part is you can move the irises independently. So if you use the selection tool and draw a selection around just one of the irises, then you can use the arrow tool and move that one until your character makes more sense. Great, so now that we have the bulk of the eyes, I'm going to add just a few elements to make them pop a little bit more. Now, one of them is going to be adding some paler red within the irises, and I'm going to just use the color of the dragon for that. And then I'm just drawing a big blob in the bottom right section of the eye. So it's not touching the edge of the iris, but almost. Now I'm also going to add a shadow at the top of the eye, which I know sounds crazy, but once more, bear with me. It just helps the eyes pop way more and it gives them a ton more life. So go ahead and create a new layer above the irises, but below the outlines, and rename that new layer to Eye Shadow. And then go ahead and apply that layer as a clipping mask so it stays within the eye shape we have as well. Now, just like we did for the sketch, we are going to use the blending mode multiply, which is going to make the color we use for the shadows change depending on if it is on top of the irises or on top of the white of the eyes. Now, I'm also going to lower the opacity of the shadows, probably around, I don't know, maybe 40% for now, just so they're not too intense, but we can always tweak that later, of course. I think I'm just going to pick a purpley blue color for now. But as you've seen, we can easily tweak that with hue, saturation, and brightness later. So for now, just pick really whatever, and we're going to change it in a second. And then go ahead and just draw a shadow that follows the shape of the top of the eye. Okay, so you can see it's already starting to bring the eyes to life. The big highlight is what's going to make the biggest difference, but those shadows really just help make them look a little bit more like eyes and just less like stickers, I guess. Doesn't look the best though, because we don't have the right color. So go ahead and open up hue, saturation, and brightness right here and play with all the sliders until you're super happy with the result. I think I'm going to maybe lift the saturation, which is how much color, I guess, is in the color. So the lower the saturation, the grayer the color is, and the higher the saturation, the more vibrant the color is. So I'm going to set mine, I don't know, around 90%. And I might also make it not quite as dark, so increase the brightness. So I'm not really going with anything super precise, as you can see here. I'm kind of guessing and just figuring out as I go. But in the video, as you are working, there will be the hex code on the top right, so you'll be able to use that if you want to use the exact same final color, at least I used in my example. And the final thing we're going to do for the eyes is add a big bright highlight. So go ahead and create, you guessed it, a new layer above everything and rename that new layer to Highlights. And this is when we're going to pick pure white, so just go ahead and pick the top left corner of your color selector. And then just add simple highlights like this. Now, if you wanted at this stage, you could go ahead and merge all your eyes layers, but I like to keep everything separate. That's just what I'm used to doing because I used to work with clients and sometimes they wanted to change a tiny things at the end, and so keeping everything separate would make it way easier. But it's still important to have an organized file, so we're going to group all the eyes layer. So we're going to swipe them all towards the right with one finger, and then just tap on group right here. You'll be then able to collapse the group and rename it to make your file way neater than it was before. And the last thing we're going to do before adding the lights, the shadows, and the background is drawing the nose and the mouth, of course, because right now it looks a little bit creepy. So we're going to go back on the dragon outlines layer here. I know technically it's not an outlines, but close enough. And we are just going to use, at least in my case, you could do something different. I'm going to use the color I used for the eyeline. So just a darker version of my dragon outlines. And then reactivating the sketch so we can know what we're doing. Really simply just going over what we sketched for the nose and the mouth. Oh, and I almost forgot, we are going to add some lines on the belly as well. Totally optional, but it just makes it a little bit more fun. And I'm going to draw them directly on the belly layer, and I'm going to use the same color I used for the outlines of the wings and the horns. So feel free to pause the video here if there's any other element you might want to add to your dragon. And then once you're done with that, we are going to move on to adding a super quick background before adding the lights and the shadows. So the background is going to be super simple. We're just going to make it glow a little bit to make the dragon feel a little bit more magical. So go ahead and start by setting your background color. I'm going to use a really nice dark burgundy, just almost black but with a little bit of red in it. And the hex code for that color is 1C0813. Probably just looks almost black on camera, but trust me, it's not quite black. From there, we're going to add a little bit of magic with some highlights and some glow. So go ahead and create a new layer below everything dragon related, which scrap that. Actually, let's go ahead and group everything that is dragon related within one big group. So swipe your layers from the dragon layer up to the eye group, just amid the sketch essentially. And then select the group option right here at the top and collapse your group. So much better. Now, of course, you can rename the group. I'm going to rename it to dragon. Okay, then once that is done, go ahead and create a new layer, put it below your dragon group, and rename that new layer to glow. Now for now, really pick pretty much whatever color because we're going to tweak it with hue, saturation, and brightness, of course, our new favorite tool. I'm going to start with pretty much exactly what I use for the shadows to start with, just maybe a little bit brighter. I think one thing I do recommend is having the color you pick be pretty much in the middle in terms of the saturation so that you can tweak it a little bit easier, or more easily, I should say, I guess, in the hue, saturation, brightness tool. And then all you're going to do is you're going to make whatever brush you're using the biggest you can, and you're going to draw a big blob behind your dragon. So kind of like you're trying to draw the outlines, but really thick and messy. Okay, so once you have that, we're going to apply a blur so that it looks more like glow and less like whatever this is. And to add a blur in Procreate, super easy. You go in your adjustment panel right here at the top, you select Gaussian blur, and then by swiping your finger towards the right on the screen, you're going to add more blur, and toward the left, you're going to decrease the amount of blur. So I'm going to set mine around, let's go with 42, why not? Okay, but now to help make it look like it's glowing, we are going to use a blending mode. But this time we're going to use a blending mode that makes a color lighter instead of darker, of course. So go ahead and tap on the little N next to the check mark. And instead of going above normal, which is what we did to find the darkening blending modes, we are going to go below normal, which at least for a few is going to be a bunch of brightening color modes. I'm going to pick add, and for now it doesn't make a big difference, but bear with me, it's going to help because we're going to add some rays of lights, we're going to add some shadows, and then essentially that's going to make a difference then. So speaking of which, go ahead and create a new layer and rename that new layer to light rays. For now, I'm just going to use the same color I used for my glow because again, we're going to change it. But this time, instead of drawing a big blob, we are going to draw some rays. And don't worry, it does need to be perfect because we're going to add blur in just a second. But you do want to have some rays that are probably starting around where the heart would be and with various thicknesses and various length. Now, I'm not going to have any at the bottom, like below the dragon, so mostly just on top of the body. And then once more, we are going to add some blur. So in the adjustment panel, Gaussian blur, but this time we're not going to blur quite as much because I do want to see a little bit of the shape of the rays. So I'm personally going to go with, let's go with 12%. And just like we did for the glow, we are also going to use a blending mode here. I'm going to use, I guess I'm just going to use add again, but I might lower the opacity of it a little bit. I don't want the rays to be the main thing. So yeah, I think I'll set the rays around 25% for now. The exact recipe is totally up to you. And speaking of experimenting, I'm going to go back here on my glow layer and I'm going to play with the hue, saturation, and brightness tool to see if there's a color that I prefer to whatever I just randomly picked right here. Now I think I want something a little bit more purple, like a more pinkish purple. So yeah, something like that. I think it complements the dragon a little bit better. I think I don't want the rays to be quite as saturated. I want them to be a little bit wider than the glow itself. So once more, hue, saturation, and brightness, and I'm going to decrease the saturation and maybe increase the brightness a little bit too. So something like that. Now I might also decrease the opacity of my glow. I feel like it's just a little bit too much right now. And one last little thing before moving on to the shadows, we're going to add some glowing, I don't know, fireflies, just little dots essentially around the dragon, just to amp up the background a tiny bit more. So go ahead and create a new layer above your dragon group and rename that new layer to, let's just go with fireflies. Now here I'm going to pick a super bright version of my dragon color, so a bright pink. And I'm going to draw some dots here and there. Now make sure they're not all the same size, make sure at least a few of them overlap with the dragon, but otherwise there's really no right or wrong way to do this. And then to make them glow, you guessed it, we're going to use a blending mode. And just to make a change this time, I'm going to use color dodge. So once more, feel free to pause the video here if you need more time to work on your background, if you want to add anything else. And then once you're ready, we're going to add some super simple shadows and super simple lights that are going to really take that piece and bring it to the next level. Okay, so this part of the video is by far my favorite. Adding the lights and the shadows is so easy, but it makes such a big difference. It's really rewarding. Now we're going to make it even easier on ourselves by using a little trick here that once more might seem a little bit crazy at first, but bear with me. Because we cannot add a clipping mask on a group in Procreate, we have to use a little bit of a workaround, which is what I'm going to show you. So go ahead and duplicate your dragon group. And then we're going to flatten the group so we have just one layer with everything dragon on it. So to do that, tap on the group and select flatten right here. Then once this is done, we are going to create a new layer above the new dragon layer we just created, and we are going to rename this new layer to shadows. And bear with me again, this is going to all make sense in a second, and we're going to clean up the file a little bit as well. But for now, essentially what we want to do is we want to be able to draw our shadows within the dragon shape without having to worry about staying within the lines. But again, we cannot apply clipping mask to the dragon group. And if we were to apply the clipping mask to the new dragon shape we just created, well then we would not be able to edit anything within the group because the group is now hidden by the new one single layered dragon. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the pixels on the dragon layer that we just created by holding two fingers onto the layer. Then we're going to go back on the shadow layer. With the selection still activated, we're going to tap on the shadow layer and we're going to select mask right here in the menu, which is going to create this new mask above the shadow layer, which has the shape of the dragon on it. Now I'm going to deactivate the clipping mask, so that was just to give you an example, and I'm also going to hide the flattened dragon layer. And even with those things, I'm still going to be able to draw and stay within the dragon shape. And I'm also going to be able to modify the individual layers we have within the dragon group. For example, if I wanted to change a color. And I went pretty quickly on these few steps, so if you're not familiar with the different types of masks we have in Procreate, the clipping mask, the layer masks, and alpha lock, I have a video that explains all the details about what the differences are between those different types of masks and when to use them and how to use them. So I will make sure to link that in the video description below. That being said, I obviously do not want this as my shadow, so I'm going to clear my layer right here. And here, obviously, you could go ahead and manually select the shadows or the shadow color, I should say, for each section of your dragon. Or you could use our new favorite friend, the blending modes. So I'm personally going to use the same blending mode we use for the sketch, which is multiply. But you can experiment with all the blending modes above normal, which will make your colors darker. I just like multiply. I feel like it's pretty much a bulletproof one. And I'm going to, for now, set the opacity around 50%. And here I'm going to pick a kind of pinkish purple similar to what we used for the glow. And I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to tweak it once we have all the shadows mapped out. And if you want to have the exact same color I'm starting with, we are going to use B640CA. And here you can use the same brush you use for the belly. In my case, it was my basic texture brush. If you're working with cleaner brushes, or a brush without texture, I should say, you could use, I think it was the soft brush in the airbrushing pack that comes with Procreate. Or if you wanted some texture in your brush, you could use, let's see, I think a good free option that comes with Procreate would be in the charcoal pack. Honestly, any of those would work really well, but I think the willow charcoal might be my favorite. But again, in my case, I'm going to pick the basic texture brush that comes with my illustration bundle. And I'm going to keep these shadows super simple here. I'm going to quickly go over every single shadow I'm going to draw, and you can kind of watch me do it and do it at the same time, or you can wait until I'm done drawing all my shadows, then pause the video and recreate them on your dragon. So the first one I'm going to draw is going to be here at the bottom of the ear. Then I'm going to draw a crescent moon shape like this on the horn. Well, actually on each horn. I'm going to draw on the bottom of whatever these are. I still don't know. Then a little bit right here on this ear. And essentially here I'm doing, I should kind of mention that, is I'm imagining my light source being right here. So a little bit in front on the top right. So whatever is on the bottom left is technically in the shadow. So that means we're going to have some shadows that are cast by whatever these things are on the head. We're also going to have the whole left bottom side of the head in the shade. And I'm going really quickly over these because this is really not something you want to agonize over. We just want to have a little bit more volume in our piece, but these are not, fancy realistic shadows in any way. They're just there to make the dragon pop and really come to life, which, as you can see, we've just done the head, but already it makes a big difference. So we're going to keep going, and we're going to add a big shadow under the head itself. Like this, and then we're also going to draw one on the back. So we're going to kind of pretend that the wing is casting a shadow on the back, so a little bit more of a wing shape instead of just one big shadow. I kind of have these 3 strokes that we can imagine would be the 3 branches of the wings. And speaking of the wings, I might add a little bit of shadow on the wing itself, so just something super simple like this. Now the legs will have a little bit of a shadow as well, so I'm going to have one like this. Because this leg is in the back, technically the leg that is in the front is casting a shadow on it. The leg on the front is going to have a smaller shadow, but it's still going to have a little bit. And I'm going to come back in the front of the belly, between the legs, and behind the legs I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow too. Then I'm going to fully shade that leg that is on the back and add a little shadow on this back leg here. We're going to add some on the back section of the belly, I guess the start of the tail. We're going to add some on the back of the tail itself. And we're going to add a little bit of shadows on these plates on the back. So technically these are hidden by the head, or at least they're shaded by the head. So I'm going to fully shade the first 3. And then I'm going to add some shadows only on the second half or the back half of this section of the scales or the plates. And then these ones on the tail, we are seeing only the back of them because remember the tail is flicked, so these are flipped, which means the back is going to be all shaded. And then these would also technically be casting a shadow on the tail itself, so you can draw a little shadow behind the plates. So something like this, I'm actually going to go ahead and make my shadows a little bit more opaque because I feel like they were not intense enough. So I'm probably going to set it around 58. If you didn't follow along, now would be a good time to pause the video and draw your shadows. Otherwise, we're going to add another shadow under the dragon. And for that, we're going to need to create another layer, of course. So go ahead and create a new layer under the dragon group, but above all the glow and light rays we have. And rename that new layer to ground shadow. But otherwise, same thing, we're going to use the same blending mode, which in my case was multiply, and the same opacity, which in my case was 58. And here, nothing fancy, you just draw a little blob under the dragon. And actually, I might make it a little bit darker, well, quite a bit darker. I'm going to bring my opacity back up to maximum. So once more, feel free to pause the video here, take all the time you need to add your shadows, and then once you're ready, we're going to add some highlights that are even easier, but make an even bigger difference. Okay, so the highlights are going to be pretty much the exact same technique, except I'm not going to create a layer mask on the lights because my highlights are pretty much going to be within the dragon. Like it's really precise compared to the shadows, and so I don't really need to worry about staying within the lines anyway. Now I'm going to go ahead and create my highlights above the shadow layer. So again, creating a new layer, renaming it to highlights. In here, I'm going to pick the same blending mode I've been using, add, in case you haven't noticed, it's kind of my favorite. And I'm going to lower the opacity quite a lot. So I'm going to go with 28% for now. And I'm just going to draw them using the same color I used for the shadows, but again, we're going to tweak those in a second. Now go ahead and make your brush quite a bit smaller because as I mentioned, I'm going to have these highlights be really quite precise. And here, all we're going to do is we're going to outline the outline. Really, all we're doing is we're following the outlines and adding some lights. So super simple. And since our character is glowing, technically there would be highlights pretty much everywhere kind of coming behind him. But what I'm going to do to make it look like there's not just one other big outline around my character is the highlights on the top right of an element are going to be thicker, and the highlights on the bottom left of an element are going to be a little bit thinner. And that works well with the idea we had earlier when we were drawing the shadows of having the main light source be on the top right. So these highlights on the top right are also more intense, but we still have some tiny lights essentially on the bottom left, again because our dragon is glowing. So I'm going to stop talking here to let you focus on drawing your highlights, but don't worry, I'm going to keep my video going in the background so you can use it as a reference. So nothing more complicated than this. That being said, I'm going to go back and as I mentioned, I'm going to tweak the color of both the highlights and the shadows. Starting with the highlights because that's this layer I have selected right now. And of course, I'm going to use the Hue Saturation Brightness tool right here. I think I want more of a blue in my highlights because my glow is a little bit more blue-purple than just pink now. So let me do a little bit of experimenting here and then I'll get back to you with the exact settings. So I'm going to set my highlights to 37, 81, and 58. Now I feel like my shadows are pretty close, but I might play with the color as well. So just selecting the shadow layer, then Hue, Saturation, Brightness, and I think I might make them a little bit more blue as well. So just moving the hue, not a whole lot. Again, I feel like they're pretty close. So I'm gonna go with 43, 57, and 47. And there you go. I would love to see your dragon, so please make sure to share it with me on socials. Then if you would like more cute art tutorials, then this playlist is for you. I have a bunch more. But before you leave, make sure to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future drawing tutorials. Then click on the link right here, and I'll see you there.